Good morning, everybody. I'm Rhett Nelson. I work at OSPI with the Graduation of Team Effort Initiative, which is the collective impact multi-agency sort of group working at decreasing dropouts and increasing graduations across Washington. This morning is our last dropout prevention webinar of the school year. This series stemmed from our 2014 Dropout Prevention Survey that we did in partnership with Governor Inslee's Results Washington initiative. The survey districts noted a need for best practices and for what effective tools districts are using that are showing success. So far this year, we've focused on systemic elements that show success presented by districts and schools that have implemented them well and have data to show that they've been effective. I'm going to give a quick recap of what we've presented so far this year. And yes, so in September, we broke the year up into sort of 3 seasons, with the fall being focused on data use, the winter on the multi-tiered systems of support, and the spring on tools for engagement. So fall, we talked a lot about OSPI's key performance indicators, which were the measures that we're going to be monitoring here at OSPI to show that our programs and efforts are being successful with students. Several of those indicators are specifically dropout prevention related. There'd be graduation rates, course failure rates in 9th grade, attendance, and behavior. All of them key performances that show higher risk for dropping out of school. Looking at this, sorry guys, I lost my track. In October, we talked about the discipline policy and data collection that we do here at OSPI, and we had Jess Lewis presented that, and we had an example of a Tier 2 team process from North Thurston School District, how they identify kids, how they monitor their interventions for success. November, we focused on what an early warning system looks like. Sunnyside School District presented their really massive early warning system, very impressive, all the bells and whistles. They talked a lot about early warning indicators of attendance, behavior, interventions, who has access to that data, how often they monitor that data. Moving to winter, in December, we focused on what is a multi-tiered system of support. That is, we frequently show that graphic of a pyramid with an all, few, and all, some, and few categories in it. December, we focused on Tier 1 support specifically, with Sunnyside High School presenting how they use their early warning system and all hands on deck technique to really engage all the students and make them all a part of their educational process. January, we focused on Tier 2 support. Greg Benner presented a little bit on implementation science, and Kelso School District talked a lot about their Tier 2 support that they provide students that are showing at-risk indicators and their team process that they have for identifying interventions that are appropriate to the student's needs. February, we focused on the Tier 3. We chose, there's many Tier 3 needs out there. Mental health comes to mind, substance abuse. We focused on re-engagement specifically with Open Doors, the statewide framework for re-engagement, and Tacoma School District's Open Doors program presented on their multiple pathways that they have for student success that don't necessarily lead to a graduation to a high school diploma, but at least lead them to a trajectory that they're going to achieve more opportunity and for post-secondary success. That moves us to spring. We focused a lot on engagement, making sure that the students felt like they were a part of the school, that they're welcome, that they have a place and have a peer group and have adults that they can go to, as well as, you know, how can you get families engaged and the staff and faculty engaged as well. March, we focused on elementary practices, specifically trauma-informed practices that address adverse childhood experiences. April, we went to middle school with Stephen Haggerty's work on promoting student agency in middle school with some practical guides and techniques for increasing engagement with middle school students. We thought many of these techniques also translated well to transitioning elementary students as well as high school students. And then May, we talked about the, Laura Shannon here presented the high school and beyond plan and how it can be used to engage students beginning in middle school and help them transition to high school and post-secondary success and keep them engaged and on track through their high school success. And that brings us to today's conference, which is June. We're going to be talking about continuous improvement. We've been working with ESD 113 and 7 school districts around the state to increase their capacity for an early warning system, continuous improvement process, and implementation of those systems. And the ESD will be presenting with us. It's sort of that we've got all these elements that we've installed in our district. How do we know that those efforts have been successful? How do we know those efforts have been reaching the students that need them? And how can we improve the efforts that we're doing? So without a lot more rambling from me, I'd like to pass it to Dana and Mike at the ESD.
So this is Dana Anderson, and I work at the Capital Region ESD 113 located in Tumwater, and with me today is
Mike Hickman, the Assistant Superintendent.
We are pleased to share with you an overview of our experiences working for the past 2 years as part of what we called doist.edu. And as you heard from Rhett, it was a multi-district, 7-district partnership funded through a grant provided to those districts to allow some time for release and travel and participation in a series of summits. So during this overview, we are going to provide a little bit of high points here. And actually, Mike and I, as we were planning this, thought this is one of these great opportunities for us at the end of a 2-year journey to just pause and reflect and think about what did we learn from this experience, what do we take away, and how can we build on this experience should we get a similar opportunity in the future, or what are some design elements from this whole experience of learning with these district teams that we'd replicate in other projects. So this reflection was good for us, and hopefully will be good and find to be valuable to others. So just in terms of the broad outline of what we're going to do together with you, we're going to give an overview of the project itself, a little bit of background of what led up to it, and then an overview of the project as it was implemented. Some of the major elements that went into the design of this work with those district teams, and then some reflection on lessons learned. So we'll tag team this a little bit. So maybe Mike, tell a little bit about the Building Bridges, which was part of the genesis of all of this work.
Yeah, so Building Bridges was a statewide grant-funded program that emerged after quite a lot of early development work around dropout prevention and intervention statewide, and we were very fortunate to have some state funding for a number of years that funded some implementation grants, and then as the state funding kind of tapered back a little bit, the number of implementation grants went down. But what they did, which we thought was great, was they created a cohort model of new districts coming on board to kind of do planning and continuous improvement cycle development to implement projects in their area moving forward. And so the Building Bridges doist.edu cohort, which was a 2-year program, was 6, 7, institutes over a 2-year period from teams of each of these 7 school districts that received the Building Bridges DUIS.edu grants, and we kind of helped them move through learning about continuous improvement using data to inform decisions and plan actions through each of these, and kind of sequentially through each of these 7 or 8 institutes that we helped coordinate. So that's what Building Bridges was. Unfortunately, the funding for Building Bridges, we're not clear whether that will continue or not, just like pretty much everything in public education in Washington State today.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I was thinking about, this might be part of the reflection too, that often these projects emerge, they have great intention and they move forward, and you find that the funding and the funder has a set of expectations about what would be accomplished in a 1-year time, a 2-year time, and teams embark on a journey, and you find out that it actually takes much longer than you would have anticipated to get really clear direction about what your goals and aims are, who's going to be involved, and how you're going to engage in the work. And then as you draw toward the end, you start to think about, well, what measures should we have been gathering evidence around, and how should we be reporting the effectiveness of outcomes? And I think one of the reflections I have on Building Bridges is that everyone that we spoke with said that it was incredibly valuable work that was making a tremendous difference in communities that they were working within. There was lots of anecdotal information around outcomes, but there hadn't been a strong system around outcomes measures that were able to be tied back to the engagement in the Building Bridges work. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I'd say so, definitely. There was actually, through Readiness to Learn, which was kind of a component of this larger system in Washington State, there was a lot of empirical evidence about the effectiveness of that program, and funding went away for that too.
Right.
So I'm not sure that even had we collected a ton of empirical evidence, whether it would have really turned the corner around ongoing funding or escalated funding for this. I don't think it would have hurt, but I just think it's human nature to want to quantify our work, and it's difficult to quantify through powerful. There are powerful stories about the influence this has and the culture of the school district, the environment in the schools, and the experience of the young men and women who are in the K-12 system, and yet without the numbers to share with policymakers, it seems as if that has primary importance in their minds.
Yeah, so we're foreshadowing a little bit here that some of our, I think based on our life experiences in school systems as well as the research we've done around continuous improvement, is 1 year is usually, the first year is kind of where are we headed and where do we want to go. The second year is, did we really want to go there? Let's refine what we're thinking about. And then years 3 to 5 is where the enculturation work really begins, and you start to create some strong sustainability. And one of our observations is often these kinds of projects are a 1 or 2 year experience, and it's often 3 to 5 years minimally that I think is really necessary for it to go deep into organizations. But that's not to say we're without hope that the DUIS.edu work is going to be very well sustained in the communities that we've been partnering with. One of the other pieces that kind of came together around this was that the ESDs and OSPI and the cooperative owned by the ESDs with SIPSI did some work to build capacity around a model of continuous improvement called data coaching, and we'll get into that a little bit more deeply. But just by way of background, OSPI and the cooperative with SIPSI jointly funded teams from the ESDs to build capacity around data coaching, which is, and it was facilitated by the Public Consulting Group out of Boston. They brought with them a series of high-quality materials, a framework for engaging data district-level teams in data review and analysis in a cycle of inquiry. It was I would say it's a very strong refocusing and branding of high-quality material around a model of continuous improvement that was very similar to our own school improvement planning process here in Washington, but it had been renewed and refreshed quite a bit by PCG.
Yeah, I consider SIP 2.0.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's that whole process 2.0. So we brought initially before the grant even was funded, that would be one of the elements that would be involved here. So I guess that gets us to the design elements that were involved in this 2-year journey. So one major building block was that we wanted to build capacity within teams to engage in a data-informed process. And so Mike, how would you differentiate data-informed from data-driven?
Yeah, so under School Improvement 1.0, what generally happened is a district or building leader would go out and grab up as much data as they could get their hands on and spread it all around tabletops, bring in the school improvement planning team, and they'd wander around looking at all of this data, try to make some sense out of it, and drive their goals out of that review of everything that's out there within the whole realm of data related to the school. And that had some limitations in that there may have been much data that wasn't really helpful in drawing meaning about what are our problems that we're struggling with and how can we move forward to make progress in improving our performance and our achievement dealing with those problems. And also there may be data elements that the leader didn't either have readily available or didn't think of to bring that didn't get exposed during that process. So in the data-informed process that we used with the DOIS.edu Institute and through data coaching, it starts with identifying what the specific problems are and issues that we're struggling with, and then identifying those focused data sources that illuminate more about the specific issues instead of the whole waterfront of data around the school community.
Yeah, so that's one major shift is intentionality around data collection. So we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in just a bit, but we would report that as we were working with these teams over the 2 years, that was a significant portion of how we framed their experience, that we wanted to build capacity around a revitalized version of continuous improvement that was really data-informed, that it led to a clearly defined problem of practice that originated from within the team based on their deep analysis of their data and understanding the underlying root causes of some of the presented outcomes that they were exploring, and produced from there a theory of action. If this is the challenge that we've identified, articulated usually in terms of system or adult behaviors, what will we do differently to produce new results? And we called that with them a theory of action. And then the final thing that we'll dig into a little bit more is the development of a conceptual framework, and we want to share that with you too, because that we felt was really powerful as a process. But Mike, do you want to just speak a little bit to how we developed, or the role that the conceptual framework, I guess, played, and then we can talk about how it was developed in just a bit.
Okay, so what we wanted to do is, because we had these disparate teams from around the state with different contexts, different backgrounds, we wanted to try to create some kind of a shared vocabulary around dropout prevention, intervention, and re-engagement, and also some common understandings conceptually about the important components of that work. And so one of the things that we did on the very first meeting, I remember, is we asked everybody to put themselves in line. And on the far left extreme of the line was, I'm not sure I know what dropout prevention, intervention, and re-engagement means. I need a definition of that, what that is. And on the other end is, I wrote my dissertation on this, and I should be running this institute.
And fortunately for us, we had somebody.
We did. We had a couple people that had done that. Yeah. Saved our bacon.
Yeah. So we sat down and said, "Okay, you guys take over now."
Yeah. So it helped everyone who wasn't deeply steeped in the research feel a little bit more comfortable that there were others like them who were relatively new to this work, who were interested in it, and that there were mentors across this whole cohort that they could turn to for guidance and support, that they weren't on their own. So then the other thing that we had them do was we talked a little bit about maybe what we should do is we should look at the primary literature around dropout prevention and intervention research and ask them to identify what they felt were the core elements that bubbled up for them in the review of the research. And so we put them into mixed teams. We had each team review a different set of research articles and identify some like bubble maps. And from that, then we created the conceptual framework that we'll show you in a little bit here.
Yeah, so it was a great process of shared learning, and I think produced a lot of common language, which didn't exist when we really began this journey. So maybe a little bit of reflection here too, as well as some sharing. The data coaching process is what we facilitated. It was guided by this cycle of inquiry, as you can see this graphic on the screen. I know it looks fairly busy, but I would just report that it has, you'll see, I think maybe we have circular minds because most of our frameworks have some sort of cycle or circle in them, but it begins generally with this organization of a team, and a team thinking about what is our purpose and what do we want to accomplish. And so that stage we call getting ready. And at each stage of this cycle of inquiry, the thing that we found to be very valuable from the learning we've done and then the use of the resources are there very high quality materials that have focused protocols that guide a team through a process that they would use to get to a product. So in this graphic, you'll see the 6 stages of the cycle of inquiry, and within each stage, 2 products basically that would result from engaging in that stage. And underlying this, if we have lots of bubbles that came out of there, are 1 to 5 protocols that a team might use or some supporting tools. So it's a toolkit that's available. If you go to the OSPI website and traffic there, go to the search bar in the upper right-hand corner and type in data coaching, you'll find the web page there that has many of these resources linked. If you happen to go to the Capital Region ESD 113 web page, which is esd113.org, and just put /data coach, it'll take you directly to our web page that has these materials and many of the protocols there for you to access.
Yeah, given the fact that we didn't have these folks for you know, days and days and days, you know, 2 full weeks of training, which is what we received through our data coach training, we had to identify out of the getting ready portion of the toolkit which sample protocols, tools, or background information would be helpful as an introduction to the process. And as a way to help the team, as we thought about putting this together and as we worked through this, it was, we want the teams to learn a cycle of inquiry that was based on this new data-informed decision-making model, and we wanted them to actually practice the use of that new protocol in the context of their local data around dropout prevention and intervention, and student data around that, and then ultimately together to create this statewide shared framework around how can we, as a system, make sense of the work and organize our thinking and organize our resources around that work. So the tan-colored circles that you see up there, there could be as many as 10 or 12 of those tan-colored circles for each one of the red circles. We just happen to pick those 2.
Yeah, and we really wanted to focus this work. So in the first year, our intent was to build capacity by engaging in the data coaching cycle of inquiry, to guide them through activities that would lead to their understanding of underlying issues that they wanted to explore, to identify data that they felt as a team would be meaningful for them to analyze. So it's very, very much constructivist. We modeled a process, but we asked them to engage in how that process would make meaning for them. We then moved on to the exploration of the data, how you display it and how you engage in the analysis. So that's that understand the issue. And spent a fair amount of time with them around diagnosing causes. You know, what might be the underlying issues, needs, or concerns that are leading to the data that we were just analyzing. So getting down to this root cause analysis and some pretty strong protocols around that I felt were pretty engaging for all of the teams. And then this identification of a problem of practice. And one of the things we asked teams to do was to place their problem of practice within the framework that they developed. We'll talk about that framework a little bit more in just a bit. And so the end of year 1 pretty well took us up to the identification of a problem of practice and the initial planning stages of doing work and beginning to implement their plans.
If I can interrupt here, Dana, I think that in my analysis, the identification of root cause in a problem of practice is an absolutely critical component of this cycle of inquiry, and it's, I think, a differentiation from the old school improvement planning process, because once we identify what we believe are the root causes of an issue, oftentimes the school improvement planning process would kind of get stuck there about like what, so sometimes we can get stuck admiring that problem, right?
Yeah.
And under this cycle, in the section around identifying a problem of practice, it reframes the question to what is our role in this issue? What are the adult caregivers in this system, the folks who are responsible for setting the learning environments, creating the culture in the schools, and providing the support for these adolescents and children? What's our role? And are we either unintentionally creating barriers, or are we not doing some things that would mitigate barriers? And so that's what we're really focused the teams around, is what's our part in the rule. So this problem of practice is our problem. It's not the community's problem. It's not the family's problem. It's not the children's problem. It's our problem.
Yeah, I think probably of all of the changes prior to this, what we call school improvement or continuous improvement 2.0, the two most significant changes are this focus on data informed rather than data driven, and the refocusing around root cause analysis and problem identification, creation of a problem of practice. Year one concluded there. Year two, we picked up with implementation, so we started to actually work a little bit on implementation science and how the teams focused their action planning and monitored the results of their action planning with the intention of some evaluation and outcome results there. The last piece I'd share, I don't know if it comes across in this conversation, but Mike and I have become quite passionate about this data coaching approach, and we would share that it's truly agnostic to context. We've facilitated data coaching training with early childhood staff in Head Start, preschool teams that are working on identifying a problem of practice and implementing change through a continuous improvement model, with district teams, and in this context with folks who are wrestling with dropout re-engagement needs and identifying the supports they might provide to be preventative and also supportive of young people who are disengaged, in the process of disengaging from school. So it's a model that works, honestly. It's a process that produces product and is very supportive of deep engagement in problem identification.
That's not to say we instituted it perfectly.
No,
and when we get to the reflection part, we'll share a little bit more about what we learned in that.
About that. So Mike described some of the process that we went through. This still says draft because it's in continuous improvement itself. This is probably version, what, 7, 8, 9, I don't know. So quite a few iterations of this.
Actually, this is one iteration older, still one newer one from this, but we'll describe what the changes are in that as well.
So Mike shared the process we went through of providing literature, original source materials to team members, jigsawing and building some awareness around what those materials had in common. So we did our own sort of mini meta-analysis of the literature as it relates to high school completion. And we started to identify some common elements in the literature here. And you can see kind of at the center, I might describe the framework in a bit, but you can see what was core or centered to this is if we have engaged learners, it's almost like a theory of action itself around this whole framework. If we have built a system that produces engaged learners, then we have a strong start for the probability of successful high school completion and launches from there. But these other elements emerged that are supportive of the entire process, leadership, and also this kind of culture of continuous improvement are supportive of kind of the Richard Elmore would call this like the instructional core, I guess, of this framework for high school completion. So if you want to give us a quick tour of what this all entails.
Yeah, we started off with 7 main bubbles. And student engagement was a separate, its own bubble at one point. leadership was its own bubble, continuous improvement, et cetera. Those are the kind of main core ideas that seem to emerge in the review of all of this kind of primary research literature. And so we started kind of messing around with, well, how do they relate to one another? How do these major components relate to one another? And there was some, when we had just like the students in the center here, right? Yeah. And as we iterated this time and again, what kind of emerged for really strong support was this idea that Dana mentioned, that the key, the central thing, the one that overlapped nearly every single piece of evidence that we examined was, if students are engaged academically and if the students are engaged socially and emotionally by that school system in their learning, they will find ways to overcome any barriers and they will persist through adversity and make it through to high school completion. So that's what, and we started talking this as a framework for dropout prevention, intervention, and re-engagement. So wait, no, it's more universal than just dropout. This is a framework for completing high school.
That was one of our iteration changes I recall too. It's not about dropout, it's about high school completion. So
yeah.
That's good.
So we have the big chunks of leadership that provides these procedures, policies, allowing for some creativity and some license to make mistakes and that kind of support that comes from the top, managing changes and ensuring equitable distribution of resources around this work. We also have this system of continuous improvement that can be used across all of our systems, including the work around high school completion. That includes having systems and having individuals that are assembled into teams that provide a review of that data and a use of that data to inform the decisions that we're making, and that provides some training in PLCs to the broader audience of folks in the school districts, and to have a system of protocols and processes to help people make some sense as they're analyzing the data.
I'd say, that these seem like essential conditions. You need to have effective, strong, and engaged leadership, and you have to have systems of continuous improvement. And my reflection, although we're not to the reflection stage, is that many of our teams focused on these larger systems things, although they would report, I think, that their problem of practice was centered around instruction or climate or systems of care. But almost all of our teams at some point in their journey said, what we're missing is a comprehensive data system that gathers evidence of student success or lack thereof and provides some sort of early warning indicators of where they're at. So a lot of folks ended up putting a fair amount of energy around data systems, training on the use of those data systems, and then having protocols for data collection, data reporting, and data analysis. So this framework, I think, helped kind of center things. And I think if we had a disposition towards being more prescriptive and directive of folks, we'd say that's certainly an enabling condition, but at some point we have to shift instruction, we have to improve the climate, we have to create systems of care if we're really seeking engaged learners. So that helped, I think, for us to say, okay, we're seeing energy in this one space, kind of on the outside enabling condition, and not as much energy directly focused on some of these more core pieces around instruction, climate, and care.
Yeah, it is interesting and an important role of leadership, but you're absolutely right in terms of enabling conditions. That's why leadership and improvement are kind of outside the big circle as they apply to every bubble inside the circle. So they're overriding requirements in order for this work to be effective.
So this is the substance of probably many, many webinars, and books have been written on this topic and research articles clearly that we read. But in the end, to produce engaged learners, we identified these three strong building blocks that are necessary kind of at the core of all of this, that we have effective instruction that is deeply connected to the content and gathering feedback through assessment. That's one big bubble.
Gathering and providing.
Gathering and providing feedback. And then the school climate, really being conducive to learning, conducive to celebration of diversity, and is beyond the sort of academic, but is really looking at social emotional wellness and other dimensions of kind of a whole child, whole learner. And then finally, a strong system of identification early, of needs, and then care systems that are being provided that really wrap around individuals or groups of students based on their unique learning needs.
Yeah, the MTSS stuff that Rhett just talked about a little while ago. One last thing with regard to this framework is that one of the kind of fundamental researchers in the nation around this work is Bob Balfont out of Johns Hopkins University in the Everyone Graduate Center. And we had an opportunity to give him a look at this framework in a telephone conference call that we had. And he looked at it and he said his first blush analysis was it was pretty complete, that it really didn't appear to be lacking any important thing. And he would suggest that what we want to do is kind of create some supports around the system. So if a school team or a district team was just starting this work and didn't know where to start, you might point them over here to what Dan was talking about. The data system, the early warning system, the ABCs might be a good place to start their conversation.
And get them drawn in. So
yeah.
There's a lot of work here, and I'm hopeful that we as a state can remain engaged in this framework for high school completion, begin to enculturate it into our practice, and then build some resources around it so you can see how extensions from this work would be just amazing to have. If this was fully interactive in a website and you wanted to get the research behind any one of these elements, you wanted to see some exemplars of best practice where within our state folks have work or gaining traction in this, to just be a great opportunity for some continued development.
Yeah, and one thing that we did after we developed kind of iteration 1.3 or 1.4 is we went back to the getting ready step and we created this self-assessment based around each one of those core components for the teams to analyze where are we doing a lot of work and we feel pretty comfortable, and where are we maybe falling a little short in terms of the primary components, that we could start our thinking about systems improvement based on the results of this self-analysis. So we kind of did it real time for them and incorporated it into the cycle of inquiry.
Yeah, give them some new data to think about where they go, because often folks just want to know, now that we've reached this place and we have a good sense of what our needs are, as Mike shared, we don't want to get stuck there. We want to think about where we start. So the last piece that we've shared that was one of our major design elements was that this whole learning experience and journey was a team-based model, that it was expecting that at the district level there was actively engaged leadership, that teams represented of their district community. In some cases we saw active membership from community members, which was just really fantastic. But it was team-based, and it was cohort-based, really, because it was not just district and community teams, but they came together to, I think, celebrate learning, share resources, and encourage one another, and honestly, be accountable to one another for product or outcomes. Each session that we were designing, we as a management team were very purposeful about how we would engage our participants in active and sustained learning. We wanted it to be a curriculum that over the 2 years made sense, so that continuous improvement model created a framework for us as well. Sort of topically, we were progressing through that, as well as the deep engagement of the framework for that we had developed with those teams. And then finally, the last design element was that there was coaching support, that these teams were not expected to be on their own. So this last spring, we had the wonderful opportunity of going to many of these districts, being with them as they were sharing where they were at in their journey, and then provide what little consultation we could, but be available to them and help them throughout this journey to not get stuck, but to continue to move forward.
Yeah, we talked about the important role of gathering and providing feedback in one of the components of that framework for high school completion. We did the same thing early on in our process with these institutes. As we asked for feedback from the participants, and what they told us was among the most valuable use of time from their perspective was team time around the cycle of inquiry process tools, with a coach sitting at their team table with them, providing answers to questions, asking other essential questions, and just kind of trying to support and guide the work of the team to make sure that they had the they were almost all on the right track, but sometimes you just need to be confirmed that you're headed in the right direction, or maybe just slightly bumped in a little bit different direction through the addition of another thought. And so we, as the educators, with a lot of years in the business, we want to stand and deliver. Our inclination is to fill all the time with presentation, and our experience with this work and other work is that the less of that we do and the more that we engage the learning teams in deep discourse and thought and wrestling with their important problems in the context of their real world to create plans and implement solutions, the more effective it is. The less we do, the better the results are from their perspective.
So that takes us to some reflective moments. So, just thinking about the lessons we've learned along this journey for the last couple of years. And I think I'll just pick up where Mike left off. One is that I think about we really struggle as systems leaders, as managers of change, facilitators of change, of sustaining focus over time. And even though this was a 2-year journey, it's difficult to sustain that focus even within the 2-year journey. And I don't know if it's a product of our culture or our current age, but not age in years, but the age that we live in, where we have technology and other experiences kind of fight against kind of building the habits of mind that keep us engaged in deep problems of practice that require high levels of cognitive load that really require us to build capacity and change practice. We struggle with that, I think, as individuals and as systems.
We did have a couple of teams, however, that have been engaged in this work long before they received the Build the Bridges grant and have sustained the work for many, many years. And so I was very proud to know that some of our systems have found a way to do that.
Yep. So some of our lessons learned that are just experiential. I don't know how much we could have done directly to respond to these things, but we noted that in the year 2 that there were some of our teams that had wholesale change, that the members of the team had changed from one year to the next in terms of leaders, that there was significant transformation in their leadership engagement, or the folks formerly in the role of leader had moved to other roles and the teams had changed. So I'd say there was a qualitative difference between the district systems that had the same folks at the table throughout and those folks who essentially experienced a reset or a restart when there was team change.
Yeah, and not only team change, but we also had a change in leadership of this work at the State Office of Education level as well. And so we had a wonderful, experienced program coordinator at SPI, Sue Firth, who left the system, and we had another new wonderful coordinator come in, Lori Shannon, but she was unfamiliar with the deep history of the work that we had done in year 1 and our style of implementing the institutes. And so there was this kind of period of time where she's learning about the work that we've done. She's shaping the work that we're planning to do for the current year. And so there was 2 or 3 levels of this leadership change that were occurring simultaneously.
Yeah, and so that lesson, as we reflected, we were just talking together about, okay, what have we learned? So we learned that these design elements are really critical, that we believe very strongly in a process of deep engagement around a cycle of inquiry. We think it's critically important to develop shared language and shared understanding, so that's why that framework emerged. We believe in team-based processes that engage folks together in shared learning. It produces capacity across the system. And I think if done well and the focus can be maintained through active involvement of leadership over a period of time, it creates resilience in the system because so many people are involved and aware of process and can carry that history forward. And that's related to this last piece is creating a history or an archive. How do we, I guess it's a question that we wrestle with, is how do we create this repository of learning that can be an accelerant for people coming in new to a system so they can catch up on what has this experience been and where are we headed, and then how do we also create archives that can be shared at the state level, the regional level, and the district level so that other folks interested in this work can follow along, sort of DIY as they move forward. So there's a couple of the lessons learned from our experience for this last 2 years. Among them are that 2 years feels like too short a time. At the front end of it, it seems like forever, and at the back end of this learning journey, it's like a Carpenter's song. We've only just begun. I'll take references from 70s and early 80s music for 100. But it does feel like that the ask of some of the teams at the end of our last session was, when can we have somebody check in with us? Because the accountability of coming back together or knowing that someone was going to show up, call, or check in on our work was helpful for keeping us move forward.
Yeah,
because we knew there's a milestone in the calendar that we better be prepared for. Just to know that we need to be planning for that too, as well as the moral imperative within our system. So.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about the role of leadership and kind of creating this history or archive. Maybe I'd add another /input culture.
Yeah.
After that, because given the fact that this transition in leadership is occurring wholesale across our whole system, we have to be thoughtful about how we think about that. And if we have influential community partners who are engaged as part of this teamwork around dropout re-engagement, and that maybe they don't necessarily have to be ongoing members of the team over time, but we need to bring them in with real specific roles from time to time, so that we develop this culture of this is how we do this work in this community. And when we go out to look for a new leader during periods of transition, we look for leaders who can contribute and drive this work forward, rather than looking for some fictional best typical leader who brings a whole new agenda and all different protocols with them that is disruptive to the sustained progress in this work.
Yeah. I guess it's a bit of a random thought, but you got me thinking about this. Another piece was that we heard from a couple of community partners was their desire to be strong partners with the school system. I think that's a great message for many of us in K-12 and beyond, is that members of our community want to be actively involved, and they want to be involved in ways that are more than simply writing a check. And we heard that a couple of times, that too frequently the leaders or leadership teams come to their community partners seeking resources, and the two critiques we heard were, help us to be involved in more than just resource providing, help us to be actively engaged in the solutions. And then in the end, don't forget as leaders to say thank you and express your appreciation for what they contributed to your team and your team process.
Right, the partnership is more than philanthropy.
Yeah.
Right, so sticking out our hands and getting a check deposited in is not a partnership.
Yeah.
That's philanthropy on their part. If we want to be partners, then we have to contribute toward the attainment of their goals, as well as them contributing to the attainment of ours.
So in this session, what we wanted to do is give you an overview of the project, where it came from, what its genesis was in terms of history, and then specifically what we did within DOIS EDU, and then explore with you some of the major design elements of this whole model. And for us, it's been valuable to think about those, because we think about the next time something comes along, we have built some capacity and say, regardless of the topic, we know that anything we were to design would include cohort-based, team-based, using a process of continuous improvement, the development of or the sharing in the creation of a framework that produces shared language, and then thoughtful planning around managing team and leader change and transition, and creating the greatest potential for cultural or systems change by remaining engaged in this work for a period of 3 to 5 years. That's kind of my quick summary of where we've been and some of our lessons learned along the way.
Yeah, so we really want to express our appreciation to Rhett for asking us to participate in this and share this story, because in the process of preparing for that, it compelled us to be reflective about how things went and what we felt were important elements of success and what areas we felt like we could do a better job on moving forward. So that metacognition and reflective time often in our rush, we don't take the time to do that, and sharing this helps us with that today. So thank you, Red.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Dana. If anybody out there has any questions, feel free to type it into the question box. I can see them here. We can get them answered. Otherwise, I'm going to close out this session. I've got a couple items to talk about. What's my order here? Let's try this. There we go. Where you can find the resources that we've talked about so far. We have all of our archive presentations online. We have at our website. We've got all the presentation materials and links to the videos. We have a YouTube page that just has all the videos of the 10 presentations we've had this year. I thought, thank Mike and Dana for your thoughtful assessment of the work that you've done this year. I think you guys brought up a lot of great points. I wanted to talk a little bit more about, we talked about 2 years as being a short time, and these grant-funded cycles that we have. A lot of the work that that goes into student support and these extra efforts frequently comes from grant-funded funds, and working on developing that partnership with the community would help a more sustained model approach. And I was fortunate enough to go with Spokane to an awards that they had, a national award that they won, and a lot of collective impact groups were there, and they talked a lot about the role of grants in their process, and just that those groups that are finding a lot of success are always viewing their grants as seed money, not as funders of their efforts. That's going to be from the community members. That's going to be from some other source, some sustainable source, rather than these grants that might come and go at the whim of a legislator or whatnot. I appreciate everybody's attention and focus on this. I would love to hear any sort of feedback that you have. If you can send it to me. Any topics that you could think of if we run this next year, if you found it valuable enough that we should continue this series starting in September. I'd love to hear back from you. And thank you everybody for your presentations.
Thanks, Rhett.
Bye everybody.